The taiga at night was a breathtaking expanse of silence. The sky, a deep...
The cold bites at my skin, the silence screams. I feel its presence drawing closer, an unsettling awareness in the shadows. Moonlight revealed the stark reality of the clearing. Industrial steel, pristine and cold, waited silently in the path of the approaching animal.
In the profound silence of the winter woods, violence can erupt without warning.
The snapped trap lies open in the snow. There is no sign of a struggle, no dark liquid. The surrounding snow is undone. The cabin had always felt safe, a refuge. But as the guttural sound, he had hoped the isolation would protect them. But the sudden, violent impact against the door confirmed his deepest fears. The axe felt heavy, an extension of his own dread. His fingers ached, but the fear kept his grip locked tight around the weathered wood. We knew something was out there in the darkness, but we never expected eyes like these. Sleep offered no refuge. The cold certainty of the breach dominated his thoughts. Inside, the fire promised warmth, a stark contrast to the freezing silence that now defined his existence.
Дверь рухнула. В проеме возникла тень, настолько огромная, что надежда тут же покинула меня. Ледяной воздух обжигал легкие.
I threw the lamp without thinking. The explosion was immediate, and in the blinding firelight, I finally saw the shape of my fear.
Slowly, painfully, the letters formed. Alexei. The name hung there, ephemeral. He couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. The darkness beyond the glass held secrets he wasn't ready to face. The low angle of view transformed the pine trees into enormous, silent guardians, their crowns heavy with snow that seemed to drink the moonlight. The silence of the clearing was heavy. It wasn't the cold that chilled him, but the violence of the break in the wood emerging from the snow. The forest pressed in, an impenetrable wall of night. Alexei watched, barely breathing, convinced something watched him back.
Повествовательный, от третьего лица, с глубоким погружением во внутренний мир главного героя. Детализированные описания окружения и сенсорных ощущений создают эффект присутствия.
The morning air, sharp and clean, cut into the lungs like frozen glass. The world here was... The forest was a cage, and the cabin merely the illusion of safety. He searched the darkness for an escape that wasn't there. The silver light washed over everything, cold and unforgiving. He wondered how long he had stood there. He watched the flame dance, a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. But then, the wind found a way. The darkness outside was one thing, a familiar enemy. But the shadows gathering around the doorframe felt different tonight. The full moon illuminated the vastness of the forest, making the small cabin seem impossibly fragile. The forest held its breath under the massive moon. As the cabin light flickered, an unseen presence settled at the silence stretched on, broken only by the swirling dust caught in the pale moonlight. But he knew. He had walked for hours through the biting frost, drawn by the promise of warmth from the solitary light ahead. The morning light revealed the world in frozen detail. Yet, even in this perfect stillness, his silhouettes. The cabin air was thick with the scent of lamp oil and the quiet stillness of isolation. Ночь за окном была черна, и в этой черноте таилось что-то зловещее. Его глаза искали ответы. The forest watched him with 1,000 dark eyes. He felt small, insignificant, swallowed by the towering silence of the ancient trees. The path was obscured by roots and shadow. mirroring the tangle in his own mind. He pushed. He stopped, his breath catching slightly. The marks were high above him, impossibly deep, gouged into the ends. He reached out, his hand trembling, drawn to the marks left by something wild. The bark was rough. The forest offered a fragile peace, but Alexei couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing. His breath hitched, a silent gasp trapped in the freezing air. Outside, here, deep in the woods, safety was a fragile illusion. The heavy knocking confirmed it. They had found me. He recognized the place instantly, though years had passed. A tremor of apprehension, cold and...
Alexei breathed in the silence of the forest. It was a profound peace, yes.
The sunbeams pierced the gloom, illuminating the dust, mirroring the unsettled thoughts swirling in an unnatural quiet had settled upon the woods. The absence of birdsong spoke volumes, amplifying the anxiety that gnawed at him from within. Just outside the cabin, the snow lay undisturbed. But the sound was unmistakable. As the cabin came into view, the isolation grew. Alexei stepped onto the porch. The forest offered no comfort, only shadows that seemed to watch him. He listened to the silence, straining for any sound other than his own ragged breath. Sleep offered little refuge here. Even in the stillness of the cabin, the shadows seemed to cling to him.
He stood by the glass, the only light for miles. Outside, the snow fell silent.
Дверь была заперта, но это не спасало от гнетущего чувства, что он здесь не один. В тусклом свете луны танцевали пылинки, и каждый шорох отзывался тревогой.
In the quiet of the cabin, the sputtering candle marked the passage of time. Each flicker brought him closer to the edge of his thoughts. He felt the bite of the wind first, a cold that mirrored the emptiness inside him. He saw it then, impossibly large against the pristine snow. A tremor of fear, cold and sharp, cut through. The tranquility of the morning was shattered by the tracks in the snow. They were impossibly large, leading away from the cabin and directly towards him. The print was fresh, impossibly large, right at the edge of the porch. The wind howled outside, a sound swallowed by the thick log walls. But the silence inside was worse. Sleep wouldn't come. The silence of the woods pressed in, amplifying the frantic beating of his own heart against the quiet cabin walls. Deep within the ancient woods, where the light begins to fail, the air hangs heavy. The gouges in the wood were fresh, a stark reminder of what lurked outside. And then...
Внутренний мир содрогнулся от внезапного звука. Влажный треск нарастал, и ощущение неминуемой угрозы сковало его разум.
Flashing. The moonlight offered little comfort as the cabin began to shake. It started as a tremor, a deep thrum.
The cold air burned his lungs as he ran. Sweat beaded on his forehead, a chilling reminder of the terror closing in. A primal fear gripped him, freezing the breath in his lungs. He looked up just as the shadow passed.
The focus settled, sharp and unforgiving, on the patch of ground ahead. The undergrowth was crushed. The branches...
A deep stillness enveloped the forest, a silence so profound it felt like a presence itself. The moon... The air inside was still, colder than the grave. His breath plumed like smoke in the dim lantern. He hesitated, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Behind this door lay the truth he desperately sought, yet feared to find. The forest had watched him retreat, but it wouldn't let him hide. He heard the sound begin, a violent tearing of wood that seemed to scream his name.
This was the place his grandfather spoke of, a sanctuary against the world. But looking at it now,
the beam of light was sudden, violent. It swept across the tree line, searching, and with it came the cabin offered little comfort tonight. Outside, the woods waited silently, an oppressive presence pressing against the thin walls.
He raised the hammer again, his movements deliberate and practiced, yet each impact carried an undue weight.
Every strike of the hammer was an attempt to keep the outside world at bay, yet the silence of the lake crept in regardless. From the edge of the woods, the cabin seemed deceptively peaceful under the moonlight. But the quiet felt heavy. Outside, the forest was a wall of silence. Inside, Alexei felt the tension mounting, a cold certainty. Outside the cabin, the forest was a presence, watching. He couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient stirred within the darkness beyond the glass.
От третьего лица с глубоким во внутренний мир главного героя.
The perimeter was active. Level 6 security protocols engaged. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the calm before the infiltration.
холод металла пронзает даже сквозь броню. Этот звук ударов все еще стоит в ушах, напоминая о силе, что оставила этот шрам.
Alexei focused intently on the task, the grinding sound a counterpoint to the silence. Each stroke of the whetstone spoke. From the safety of the cabin, he watched the woods. That flickering light was his only guide, a beacon in the pervasive darkness. In the flickering light, his resolve hardened. Fear was a luxury he could no longer afford, not with what waited for him out there. Fear was a cold companion. It traveled with him from the flickering warmth into the silent, watchful darkness of the pines. Something massive was here. He thought the forest was calling him, but now that he was here, swallowed by the pines, he realized it wasn't a call, but a trap. Here, amidst the scattered blueprints and cold metal, Alexei meticulously assembled the pieces of his escape. Failure was not an option he dared consider. The workshop faded, replaced by the damp earth and grasping vines of the forest path.
The scribbles confirmed his fears. The resonant frequency was increasing. He had to set the trap before the sounds overwhelmed him completely.
The wind howled, a lonely sound in the vast emptiness. He pulled his coat tighter, though in the silence of the cabin, the tapping echoed louder than it should. A cold certainty settled in his stomach. Someone was out there. Leaving the cabin behind, the forest closed in. The wind rose, a cold reminder of the vulnerability he felt under the watchful sliver of the moon. The marks were faint, almost imperceptible at first glance. But they were there, leading cautious. The first hint of gray light on the horizon signaled the dawn. The air was still and cold, the landscape. He couldn't face the memories held within these walls. The axe, the saw, the hammer, each one a reminder of the cold seeped not just into the cabin, but into his very bones. The lamp trembled, reflecting the fear he refused to acknowledge. The scratches on the floor weren't old. They looked fresh, and the shadows in the corner seemed to writhe just...
Ночь окутала старый дом. Внезапно тишину пронзил резкий стук в дверь. Он вздрогнул, понимая, что его нашли.
Fear was a cold bead of sweat tracing a path down their temple. The silence of the cabin was...
He heard it then, a subtle shift in the floorboards upstairs. It hadn't been his imagination. Despite the warmth of the lamp, a chill ran down his spine. He pressed closer to the glass, certain he was not alone in the suffocating night. The darkness outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within him. He was trapped here, surrounded only by the watchful eyes of the forest night. Every step felt amplified in the oppressive quiet. He knew he shouldn't be here, but some instinct pulled him further into the moonlit gloom.
Внутри бревенчатого домика царила гнетущая тишина, пока первый удар не сотряс стены. Страх сковал его, когда дерево начало трескаться.
Another, even more forceful impact. The entire structure groans under the strain. Debris is thrown from the point of impact. The cabin burned brightly against the silent darkness of the forest. He stood utterly alone. The inferno The forest pressed in, a suffocating darkness broken only by the approaching light.
The world had narrowed to the pounding on the door. A primal fear.
The door splintered, revealing not freedom, but a presence so immense it threatened to crush his very soul.
In the sudden chaos, Alexei felt a primal fear. The world outside had finally breached the fragile safety of the walls.
The trees parted, revealing the cabin. A dim light spilled from the window, a lonely beacon in the oppressive night. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to move faster, but the table resisted, heavy and unyielding. The outburst subsided, replaced by a cold, immediate dread. He pressed himself against the floor, seeking...
Руки Алексея дрожали, крепко сжимая рукоять топора. Металл тускло поблескивал в низком свете. Решимость ожесточила его черты.
Illuminated by the sharp shaft of light, Alexei's face was a mask of grim resolve.
Inside, terror held him captive. Outside, the rough wood of the cabin wall offered
Слычение. Алексей медленно подходит к окну. Стекло старое и искаженное. Сквозь него видна лишь непроглядная...
Чем дольше он смотрел в окно, тем сильнее чувствовал присутствие чего-то чужого снаружи. Лес давил, а воздух сгущался.
The sound was unmistakable, a grotesque tearing of wood just outside. Whatever it was, its claws...
Холодный ужас сковал Алексея. Он отшатнулся от окна, чувствуя, как леденеет кровь. Мерцающий свет лишь усиливал панику, отбрасывая жуткие тени.
The sound ripped through the silence, a violation of the sanctuary he had built. Fear, cold and immediate, gripped him. The skin stretched tight over his knuckles, revealing the deep, mottled colors of the bruises beneath.
A low, sustained pressure was applied. With a final, steady surge of effort, the nail began to surrender. The pliers slipped again. Sweat stung his eyes, mingling with the dust. Failure wasn't an option. He had to make the connection. Red wire to the terminal. A simple task, yet his breath hitched with silent dread.
The glare was absolute, burning away the darkness. He felt the engines hum in his chest.
He stared at the concrete floor, the dust motes dancing in the sterile light. This room, empty and broken.
He retreated to the corner, a primal instinct taking over. The shadows danced on the walls, mirroring.
He couldn't stop looking at the walls, the peeling layers a mirror of his own fraying composure. Every splinter seemed to...
He traced the lines again, each gouge a memory etched into the splintered surface. The wood grain felt rough beneath his chest.
Each crude line represented a day endured, a testament to his fading hope. The air was thick.
Her fingers traced the rough letters, each groove a memory etched into the splintered wood.
The silence was broken only by the hum of the engines and the frantic beating of his own heart.
He gripped the planks, the rough wood digging into his palms. It was the silence he couldn't stand. Ripping...
Is there anything out there?
The prints were deep,
impossibly sharp against the soft snow. He knew, instinctively.
Посадка будет трудной. Слишком много отражений. Я не вижу дна. Осталось 30 метров. Приготовься к обледенению.
Повествовательный от третьего лица, с глубоким погружением во внутренний мир главного героя.
This is taking too long. Еще немного.
Inside him, a core of cold dread expanded. He told himself that the sounds outside were only the storm. His finger hovered over the trigger, breath catching in the frigid air. The creature stepped forward, its eyes cutting through the darkness.
Холод проникал в самые кости, сковывая движение. Он понимал, что этот взгляд был последним, что он увидит.
The creature nodded subtly towards the snare. In that instant, the man understood.
If I stop, the cold will win.
I couldn't move. The wood grain seemed ancient, holding a forgotten fear. Outside the door,
the air in the small cabin was thick and still, tasting faintly of dust.
He reached for the heavy-duty carabiner. The coils of rope came next. He packed the axe with finality. The faint The white, sterile silence of the forest pressed in. The figure's boots crunched rhythmically on the fresh snow. The snow seemed endless, each step requiring immense effort. He focused on the rhythm of his breathing, trying to silence the growing dread within him.